Hi everyone, Shubhendra here, developer advocate at Cashfree Payments. Today I'm going to walk you through integrating Cashfree Payments Payment Gateway into the Django app. We'll cover everything from setting up backend to creating seamless payment experience into the front end. So let's get started. A couple of prerequisites. First, a Django app, which I have already built for the demo purpose. Second, Cashfree Payments API keys, which you can get from the merchant dashboard. So let me quickly show you the Django app that I have built. So this is a very basic e-commerce application. Users will click on add to cart to add items to the cart. From the cart, users can click on the checkout button, enter order details and customer details, and click on the pay now button to open the Cashfree checkout page. So currently that Cashfree checkout page functionality is not added. We'll be adding that later. So before I start integrating the SDKs, let me briefly explain you how Cashfree Backend SDK plus Frontend SDK work together to load the Cashfree checkout page. After the installation of Cashfree Backend SDK, which is Python SDK in our case, we use the create order API to generate the order, and these are the required parameters used by the create order API for creating an order. Once the order is created, it returns a response which has payment session ID. This payment session ID will be used by the front-end SDK for opening the checkout page. So this is broadly how front-end and back-end SDK work together to load the checkout page. Now let's start with the installation of the SDK. So let's go to the GitHub repo of the Python SDK. So here you can find all the steps for installation and setting up. So the first step is installation. We'll use this command for installing the SDK. As you can see, it says requirement already satisfied. This is because I've already installed the Cashfree backend SDK previously. For you, it will take a couple of minutes for the installation. Now that the backend SDK is installed, now let's shift our focus to the front end. For the Cashfree checkout page to load, we need to include the JS SDK. We'll go to the web checkout integration, then open Cashfree checkout. As you can see, to open the Cashfree checkout, we need to include JS SDK in our client code. So let's copy this script and add it to the base.html, which is basically the master layout for this project. You can include it wherever your front-end logic resides. Now that the SDK is included, we need to initialize it. To initialize it, we can copy this code and paste it again into the base.html. We are keeping it in the sandbox mode because currently we are in development or testing phase. You can change it to the production once you decide to move your app to production. Now let's go back to the backend. We are going to create an API endpoint that collects the customer data and order data from the front end, talks to Cashfree API, and returns the payment session ID. Here we are importing the models from Cashfree SDK that will help us manage and create orders. Let's copy and paste this into our views.py. Now that we have imported the models, let's set up the credentials. We can copy and paste this into our views.py. Note that only for the demo purpose we are pasting the credentials in views.py. It is strongly recommended to put them into the .env file of your project. Let's go to the merchant dashboard to get the keys. On the merchant dashboard, go to developer section. Here, go to API keys under payment gateway and then switch to test. This will show the keys for the test environment. Now that the credentials are set up, we need to create a view for handling post requests from the front end. I've already created a view for handling post request and creating the order. So this view collects customer ID, customer phone, and order details from the front end, and then calls the Cashfree PG create order API and returns the payment session ID if successful. Now that the API for generating order is set up, we need to handle the Pay Now button on the front end. So this is the submit order function that gets triggered on clicking the Pay Now button. I've already written a code for submit order function. Here we are collecting the customer ID and order details from the form, then triggering the create order API that we just created in the backend, and then using the payment session ID for loading the checkout window. Let's copy and paste this. Now that the front end and backend SDK is set up, let's run our local server and test our app. As you can see, these are the required body parameters for the create order API. Order ID is being randomly generated. Amount is being collected from the front end. Now let's enter the customer ID and customer phone number and click on Pay Now button. Awesome, our Cashfree checkout page has successfully loaded. Now let's do a successful transaction. Transaction was successful. Now let's wait for the redirection. Great. So this URL redirection happened because in our create order API, we have mentioned the return URL as a body parameter. So whenever return URL is mentioned, the user will be redirected to the mentioned URL. You can also include notify URL parameter, which is basically for webhooks. Now a quick recap. So first we installed Cashfree backend SDK. Second, we installed JS SDK for loading checkout and then initialized it. After that, we created a view for handling the front end post request and generated the order. At the last, we used the payment session ID in the front end to load the checkout page. You can also try out Dev Studio, which is an API playground for developers. You can join our Discord developer community if you face any issues while integration, or email us at care@cashfree.com. So that's it. I hope this tutorial helps you smoothly integrate Cashfree payments in your Django application. See you next time.